With the anti-Semitic socialist Zohran Mamdani headed for Gracie Mansion, is New York City finished? Or is his election as mayor the canary in the coal mine for American Jewry? Joining us in this JNS studio to discuss this disturbing development is Commentary Magazine editor-in-chief John Podhoretz, my brother and a veteran New Yorker, an expert in Big Apple politics. Tune in for an unforgettable episode of Israel Undiplomatic.
Shalom, I'm Mark Regev for a special edition of Israel Undiplomatic. Today we're going to devote the entire program to Zohran Mamdani's victory in New York and what it means for Israel, the Jewish world, and beyond. I suppose I should also say what it means for America, too. With me, as per usual, is my co-host, Ruthie Blum. But we also have a very special guest. The first time in a year and a half of Israel Undiplomatic, we have a special guest, Ruthie's brother, John Podhoretz, who is the editor of Commentary Magazine in New York, perfectly positioned to share with us his wisdom on the Mamdani victory. But I want to tell you, John, before we get to the questions, that I personally have to tell you that me and my family have a relationship with Commentary Magazine going back to the 1960s. I grew up in Melbourne, Australia, which maybe for my parents was a bit of an intellectual desert. And every month, we'd get the printed edition of Commentary, and I remember it arriving, and we had stacks of them. They were never thrown out. They were kept, looked as intellectual resources. So what you do at Commentary was appreciated by my family way back then.
That's a great honor, and Commentary was then edited by Ruthie's and my father, Norman Podhoretz, and it was the heart of intellection in the Jewish world. It was designed, started in 1945 to explain America to the Jews and to explain Jews to America, but it quickly became, people have called it, I can't remember who, various people have called it the most important Jewish magazine ever published. Some ways the most important Jewish periodical ever published, and has covered Israel, Zionism, American Jewry, the sociology of American Jewry, the post-Holocaust Jewish world, theology after the Holocaust, Judaism after the Holocaust, and all kinds of other topics like American politics and American society. And it's a very unique publication, nothing like it. And go to commentary.org to find out more.
So now we've done the plug, I'm going to ask you a serious question.
Yes.
And then I'll let Ruthie get a word in. But look, I'm not a New Yorker. I don't care really about the price of buses in New York and how good the transit system is. I care about Israel. I care about America. And I want to share with you a thought. I was the ambassador of Israel in the United Kingdom from 2016 to 2020, which was the Corbyn years. Mm-hmm. And people talked about how Corbyn, as this radical leftist who also had a problem with Jews and was terribly anti-Israel, right? That he was the leader of what was once a mainstream party, and he took it to the radical left. And it was a problem. People talked about then at the time of the Corbynization, the possible Corbynization of the Democratic Party. Are we seeing in these New York results the Corbynization of the Democratic Party?
Yeah. I mean, it's not, this New York result comes after several years in which anti-Semitism has become a mainstream view within the Democratic Party. This is the true establishment of it, because this is the largest city in America. It's 8.5 million people. That would make it the 11th largest state in the Union if it were considered a state. It's obviously the most important city in the United States, if not in the world entire, and was, just to give you a sense of where New York is now, 12% of the population in New York is Jewish. It is still the single largest Jewish population on earth. There are more Jews in New York than there are in Jerusalem or in Tel Aviv, like twice as many as in Tel Aviv, more than in Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is obviously half non-Jewish. So New York is about 900,000 Jews. So it's the largest Jewish city but 70 years ago, 75 years ago, New York was 31% Jewish. It is now 12% or 11% Jewish. So famously is a Jewish city. It's the city of Seinfeld. It's the city of Woody Allen. It's where the conservative Jewish movement began at the Jewish Theological Seminary, where I was bar mitzvahed and where my parents studied and met and where my father-in-law was a professor for many years, the most Jewish city on earth. And if you had told me 20 years ago that this result could be possible, that not only would someone who was plenty of non-Jewish mayors of New York, interestingly enough, the most famous legendary mayor of New York, Fiorello LaGuardia, who was the mayor during the Depression, one of the great secrets of his success was that he was halakhically Jewish. His mother was a Sephardic Jew with the last name of Pardo, and he played it. Like, he went around, Jews loved him the way ethnics loved him because he talked a little Yiddish, even though he was Sephardic, but he learned Yiddish. And so that was the sort of famous melting pot of New York, that you could have this half Italian, half Jewish mayor who was the great populist hero of the 1930s. And here we move, it's now almost 100 years later. Obviously, everything has changed. Jews moved out of New York. Jews moved to the suburbs. Jews moved to Florida. Jews spread out across the United States. But for a mayor of New York City to be someone who not only doesn't visit Israel on a solidarity mission after, not that he's mayor, but, obviously, Eric, I was on a plane in 1991 when the Scuds were flying. I came to Israel. Planes were empty. The plane was empty, and there were like 7 of us on the plane. It was me and the mayor, David Dinkins, and his entourage. And that was who was on the plane, on El Al from Kennedy. And Dinkins was no friend of the Jews. Dinkins actually allowed a pogrom to take place in Brooklyn later that year. But he knew he had to show the flag, meaning the Israeli flag, at least to hold his base of support. Every mayor has done this. Every mayor, even Bill de Blasio, who probably has views on Israel pretty similar to Mamdani's, nonetheless courted the Jewish vote, came to Israel, did all that. So now we have a mayor who is it will not denounce, famously won't say globalize the Intifada is something that should not be said, since of course globalizing the Intifada means mass murdering Jews across the world. Is not a supporter of Israel as a Jewish state, says he supports Israel as a state, and he says he is a believer in equal rights for everyone. So you can interpret that however it is you want to interpret it, what that means for Israel. It's wonderful to know that he's for equal rights for everyone. I'd love to see him make some statement about, say, Iran and Iraq and their treatment of the Kurds and Turkey's treatment of the Kurds, or the treatment of the Bedouin in Lebanon and Syria. That would be an example of maybe talking about equal rights for all people having the same rights in countries. But of course, this is very localized and focused on Israel. He came to political adulthood at college, at Bowdoin College in Maine, by creating a Students for Justice in Palestine chapter. His father, Mahmoud Mamdani, is a professor at Columbia University who is an Islamic anti-colonialist. And his mother, Mira Nair, a film director who made Salam Bombay and Mississippi Masala and a couple of other movies, was, I believe, the first major director to refuse to allow her films to be shown at the Jerusalem Film Festival. This would have been 14 years ago. So she is sort of an originator of BDS in the arts. So this is where he comes from. He marinated in the Students for Justice in Palestine, hatred of Israel, became an assemblyman in New York. But the question is, did he get elected because he talked about issues that really that people in New York really care about? Are his views on Israel something that he had to overcome, or something that were an accelerant to his success? And my great fear is that the latter is true and not the former, that the Mamdani secret sauce and he won 51% of the vote, is being anti-Israel, being a hater of Israel, being somebody, a politician in America saying he does not support Israel as a Jewish state is a very unusual thing. I mean, I think 5-6 years ago, there probably weren't but one or two serious politicians in the United States who would actually adopt that view. And now the mayor of the largest city in the country holds that view and is koshering it.
Look, a lot of things that Mamdani has promised seem to be things that he has no authority to deliver on. You know, he has no authority over the transit system and whether he can freeze rents and all of those things he's promised. Nor can he does he probably have the authority to arrest Prime Minister Netanyahu if he comes to New York, as Mamdani has threatened to do. But the fact that he'll say it and say it openly, that seems very worrisome. And was that his way of saying, no, it's not that I hate Jews or the Jewish state. It's only Netanyahu and his government because of what's going on in Gaza?
You'd think, but he had daily opportunities to say, I accept Israel's existence as a Jewish state. He ran for almost a year. Any day he could have said, I accept Israel's existence as a Jewish state. Not even support it, but I accept it. Wouldn't.
Can I ask a question here? Because, I mean, you still said that 12% of the population of New York is Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I remember in London when Corbyn took over the Labour Party, his biggest opponents were Jews in Labour who said that he's taken over our party. This isn't what Labour's all about. What is this guy who's got a problem with Jews and a huge problem with Israel? Why is he the leader? And they were the most vibrant supporters. And you could only find, Jews who would come out and support Corbyn from the really radical left. But he obviously got more than the radical left. He got, I think I saw something like 30% of the Jewish vote.
We don't know that yet. That's one.
Okay, but what does it say about American Jews that he could get such a high level of support?
I'm just going to say quickly, I'm not sure I trust that number. That's from one exit poll by CNN. The way to find out what the Jewish vote is in New York City, because my guess is that it's probably closer to, was 75% voted against him, is to do a precinct by precinct count where Jews live. And it's classic that exit polls like this have a margin of error problem.
Okay.
So I think the Jews of New York did better than that exit poll suggests. But who are the people who say they're Jews who voted for Mamdani? They are Jews who do not have for whom Israel is not either an important issue or for whom Israel is an important issue in the wrong way from how we think about it, who do want Israel to be punished, who do think that that the Netanyahu government is evil and think that Israel is a genocidal country. There are plenty of very left-wing Jews who believe that. And if they exist anywhere as an electoral population, they exist in New York City as part of this 900,000 Jewish population.
So now the question is, all right, forget about the Jews. What if there weren't that many Jews in New York? The question is, how is the greatest city in the world, and certainly in America, or one of its greatest cities, how could it allow anti-Semitism to seep in, to be open, and it's going to be in Gracie Mansion? I mean, we always say that anti-Semitism is the canary in the coal mine, right?
Yeah.
And that societies that embrace anti-Semitism are in decline. So if we leave off the Jewish question for a minute, it's horrible for New Yorkers anyway, right? I mean, Donald Trump is not Jewish, but he's a classic New Yorker, and he's horrified by this.
Right. Okay, Donald Trump is almost 80 years old. Zohran Mamdani is 33 or 34 years old. I can't remember which.
34, yeah.
Okay, so that's, the problem is I'm 64. Donald Trump is almost 80. Mamdani is 34. We're all in different generations. I remember the world of the 1970s. Like Trump remembers the world of the 1960s. Mamdani represents the world of people who live in New York, who have lived in New York for 15 years and know nothing about the history, about the Jewish history. They know Seinfeld and bagels, and that's it. So what does it mean that he gets elected as an anti-Semite? It means that anti-Semitism was koshered. The way for his path was cut for him by Ilhan Omar, Alexandria Ocasio, or of course, Rashida Tlaib, Bernie Sanders, the vanguard of these views in the United States, started laying the path, and he has now completed, I'm going to use this word again, the koshering of anti-Semitism within the Democratic Party, because not only is it that he has the views that he has, but he has now proven that they can be electorally successful in a place where there is opposition to him for his anti-Semitism, and it's the largest population in America that votes on these issues. And he nonetheless gets a majority of the vote.
Can I say, for Israel, that's a huge problem because our national security is based a lot on our relationship with the United States. And we'd always used to, when I was an Israeli diplomat, you parrot that we have bipartisan support for Israel on both sides of the aisle in Washington, D.C. And what you're basically telling us is that's over. And we know historically, sometime in the next 10 years, there'll be a Democratic president. Yeah?
Sure.
And will he be an anti-Israel president?
Yes. I mean, it's more likely that he will be an anti-Israel president or she than he or she will not. I mean, imagine Kamala Harris winning in 2024 instead of Donald Trump. Do you think 2025 would have gone the way that it has gone? And she was part of an administration that was better on Israel than I anticipated, based on the fact that Biden had been Obama's vice president, Obama, the worst president on Israel in the history of the United States, the most unfriendly, the most policy threatening, with the Iran deal and then allowing the vote against Israel at the UN. Biden, somehow the first 3 months of the war, Biden did not fail us. Things got more complicated, but Kamala Harris was clearly moving in the other direction and as president, would not have.
So this has huge significances for Israel's national security. Because if you look at the crisis we're just coming out of, hopefully, the war, right? Without American support for Israel, we would be in a very tough place. And what you're telling me as an Israeli is that that is not something that I can count on in the medium term. Because Trump will finish his term in 3.5 years. No one knows who's going to be elected after him.
Yeah, it's worse than that, because there is a fight going on in the Republican Party, and the vice president of the United States and the putative possible frontrunner in 2028 is not showing many signs of being kindly disposed toward Israel or as a Jewish state. Refers to his trip to East Jerusalem to go on the Pilgrim's Walk into the Old City as a thrill for him, because he went where Jesus had walked. Very, very pointed message. Went to the Holy Church of the Sepulchre, did not go to the Western Wall. Many signals being sent by J.D. Vance that he would wish on his own to maybe take the Republican presidency in a different direction. So this is an 8-alarm fire. This is no joke. And people need to understand. I don't know. I don't have a solution to this problem. My only solution to this problem is for Israel to prevail and for the world to understand that Israel won this war and is the leading power in the Middle East, because Americans like winners. They really do. And I think part of the reason that things have happened this way over the last 2.5 years was that October 7th, for the first time, made it appear to people as though Israel was on the back foot and might be defeatable. And at that moment, all of the cockroaches came out of the woodwork, and all of the Pandora's box was opened of combining classic anti-Semitism, newfangled anti-Semitism, all this in one stew pot. And so, what Israel can do is show the world that it faced down this enemy, beat it, is restructuring, will play a part in restructuring the Middle East for the better, and then we'll see how that works.
Well, it's also ironic. We talk about this a lot, and you've also mentioned it. How funny it is that that the Israeli left has suddenly developed this love affair with Donald Trump, And why is that particularly funny? It's funny because we know the left hates Donald Trump, and the left in Israel has used that as an excuse to bash Netanyahu even more, as though only Trump cared about the hostages, only Trump cared about the war, and that's as opposed to Netanyahu, and Trump saved us. But what's really sad about it is those same people are the ones who said that Netanyahu caused a rift in America between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, which is total nonsense. I've said that to you again and again. That rift was not caused by Israel. That was caused by the Democrats going more radical. But today, as you said, the trouble is in the Republican Party, there's those seeds of the Tucker Carlson wing. And J.D. Vance hasn't quite come out openly with that, but he's showing signs. So what more Israelis, I think, need to realize is that we have to support Republicans of the Marco Rubio variety more. And so do American Jews. They have to, I would say, my advice to them is, okay, stop pretending that the Democratic Party is friendly to you and focus on the...
But here's the problem. So the problem is that this fight in America, Tucker Carlson, Nick Fuentes, if people are here paying attention to this.
Yes, they are.
I don't know, but and you're saying Rubio over all this, couldn't come at a worse time for people like you and people like me who would say American Jews and Jews have got to wake up and understand that, like British Jews, the Labour Party was no home for them anymore. And British Jewry is very small. I mean, it's tiny. It's 250,000 people or something like that. So its effect, electoral effect, is of course negligible. But it was a population that flipped from 70% support for Labour to 70% support for the Tories. And the thing is that something like that could happen in America. But this Carlson, Fuentes, Vance weirdness coming right now means that the terror effect of Mamdani's ascension is compromised, because it's like, oh, we're supposed to go over here. They're supporting Nazis. Like Nick Fuentes says he's a Nazi and loves Stalin.
Right.
And he's, and Tucker Carlson is giving him a platform. The Heritage Foundation, the most important conservative foundation in America, says it will not cut itself off from its dear friend Tucker Carlson and all of that. So it's not a good time to make the argument that the Republican Party is a wondrously good home for the Jews. I wish it were. I wish that were something that could be said, because it would be comforting. And it's something I've said for 15 years. Right now, and you have the most pro-Israel president in American history, without question. And even that is being compromised by this populist wing that is trying to establish views for the post-Trump era that may not be friendly to Israel. So you got unfriendly to Israel on the left, unfriendly to Israel on the right. Where do we go? I have no idea.
If we go back to New York, I think there's a historical parallel. And as Ruthie will tell you, because she sits with me here every week, I can be a bit of a wonk bringing back historical examples. The largest Jewish community in Central and Western Europe was in Vienna. The Jewish community at the turn of the previous century, around 1900, the largest Jewish community in that part of the world was Vienna. The Jewish community in Vienna was larger than the community in London, Paris, Berlin. It was the center of Rome. And they had an anti-Semitic mayor in this important Jewish center. I mean, when you think of Vienna, you think of Freud, you think of Herzl. They're all right. A guy called Luger, Karl Luger, he called himself not a Christian socialist, but the Christian social movement. And he appealed to gutter anti-Semitism. Some people say because Hitler, was around in the later part there of said he got ideas from this guy called Karl Luger. So the example of a city with a very important Jewish population, and the left, they elect an anti-Semitic mayor. What is interesting is the fact that if it's 20% or 25% or 30%, the fact that American Jews, as you said, I think unfortunately correctly, at least part of them, and especially in New York, obviously, maybe Mamdani's position on Israel is actually not a negative for them. They believe it. They believe that Israel is terrible. It's the philosophy of tikkun olam gone upside down and crazy. Yes, the whole idea that making right? And Jews don't have to look after their own differences, their own, interests. The Jews. I always remind people, remind what the world was like for Jews before there wasn't Israel. Yeah. Those people who don't think Israel should be a Jew say, what was it like for Jews when my father was born in Germany in 1931? What was the world like for Jews, right?
Look, I'm not sure that most of the Jews that we're talking about know the words tikkun and olam.
Okay.
Just to make it clear, there is a world of sort of religious leftist Jews, or sort of like literate leftist Jews that are tikkun olam fanatics. The people I'm talking about know nothing about Judaism, and they are embarrassed in their precincts by Israel's behavior, because when somebody says Israel's committing a genocide, they're like, I guess Israel's committing a genocide. Phil is saying it, so it must be true. And they haven't been here. They don't know what they're talking about. They probably don't go to shul on the high holidays. Maybe they have a Seder, maybe they don't. So I'm not even talking about that world. There's a world of like left-wing shuls that are bad on these things. One a block from my house, B'nai Jeshurun in New York, a vile, rotten, wretched, rancid place. But the ones I'm talking about who might actually have cast real votes for him are Jews for whom their Judaism is like a spice in their stew. It's like, I'm boring. I'm just nothing. But, my great-grandfather came over on a boat, and, he was from Europe. And so I'm not just anybody. I have racial standing. I have identity politics standing. Yes. It doesn't oblige me to do anything like learn a word of Hebrew or perform anything, but I'm a Jew just as much as you are. Well, actually, according to God, that's kind of true if you have both. If you have a Jewish mother, but it's obviously not true in the world as it stands. And the question has always been, it's very hard to figure out how many people in the Jewish community are that. It's clear that Israel is not the major focus in policy issues for American Jews who are not some form of traditional. That could be me, like I'm a conservative Jew. I send my kids to a Jewish day school. I keep kosher, but I'm not that. I'm not. A frum person wouldn't think that I was frum, to dati as far off as you could possibly go. And for us, and for people at this day school who are very much like me, Israel is a central preoccupation. And after October 7th is the central preoccupation. That and anti-Semitism together, I don't think you can divide them. But for a lot of people, it's abortion. For a lot of people, it's abortion. So if it's abortion, then it's like, okay, well, I'm Jewish or I'm not Jewish, but boy, I need my abortions. I'm voting for the party that will give me an abortion. And
up to the 9th month.
Oh, till they're 18 months old.
Right. Whereas I only believe in abortion when they turn 16 and they slam the door in your face. But when we're just saying, what do we do about the party? And you said it's really dangerous because the Republican, the Tucker Carlsons. Well, we were complaining, people like us were saying, why aren't the Democrats stomping out the radical wing of their party instead of catering to it and literally bending a knee, as we said, the George Floyd's. And so it became totally radicalized. Well, it's our duty as Republicans to do the same thing in the Republican Party, because that shouldn't be representative. And at the moment, it's not. But it could. And
Republicans, even ones whom I have great political disagreements with, like Josh Hawley, the senator from Missouri, who's a bit of an isolationist. I don't like him. Said this has no place in our party. This is horrible. This is disgusting. I was very impressed by that. It shows that there is a backbone in relation to these issues that the Democrats do.
Mike Johnson said there are a lot of people there who are.
The key moment to go back in recent history was Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, in 2019, when Ilhan Omar was elected to the House and she got the majority. And Ilhan Omar said people support Israel because it's all about the Benjamins, meaning $100 bills, that Jews were bribing people to support Israel. And Nancy Pelosi, who's been in the House for roughly 700 years, decided that she was going to try to propose a resolution of condemnation of Ilhan Omar for using this language. And the Democratic caucus in the House revolted against her. She was the person who made it possible for Democrats to have a majority. And they said, we don't want no enemies on the left. We're not going to, we don't want to condemn her. So they wrote this statement that said, we condemn all forms of hatred, anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And that they voted for. And that was the key moment, because she was an old line mainstream leftist politician, but she was like, well, you can't say that about Israel. This is bad for us. It's bad for our donors. It's bad. And you shouldn't say it anyway. And you're an upstart pipsqueak. You just got into office. Let me slap you down. And she got slapped down. And that message was key to this journey. That's, there are moments along the way that 2012, the Democratic Convention booed the idea of Jerusalem being the capital of Israel, to Pelosi being unable to harness a resolution against anti-Semitism as it was spoken by a member of Congress. And all of that are the preceding events that made Mamdani possible.
And the irony here is that anyone who knows the history of American support for Israel knows that actually in the 1940s, when it counted, it was the progressives. It was Eleanor Roosevelt. It was the liberals. There's an explanation. One of the reasons Truman goes so forward with supporting partition and supporting recognizing Israel after we establish our independence is that he's worried about the 1948 candidate from the left, right. Wallace, right? Right? There's a book was written by the guy from the Wall Street Journal. His name has escaped me. I'll remember before I should remember. The columnist who wrote the book about Israel called The Chariot. I'll remember it in a minute. But he explains, like, there's a myth that actually the Jews convinced Truman. It wasn't the Jews, it was the progressives, it was the labor unions. We were a progressive issue. Part of defeating fascism was establishing a Jewish state to settle. If people talk about making the world a better place, a more equal place, tikkun olam, giving the Jews, this long persecuted people, a homeland. And now it's flipped. Then, of course, the Republicans were perceived as the representatives of the oil companies and the WASP establishment with their country clubs who didn't want Jews as members.
Look, when I moved to Washington in 1984, I lived there for 15 years, the Republican Party was 50-50 anti and pro. I mean, when I say anti-Israel, I mean, they were like, why are we bothering with this place? And our interests really do lie. I mean, we have we have issues with oil, and we don't need to be, being, particularly supportive of this little country as opposed to these 20 other countries where we have interests. And the salvation of the Republican Party and of Israel in this way was the rise of the Christian Zionist movement, which came into being really in the 1970s and early 1980s, believed that the moment in the Lech Lecha, when God says to Abraham, those who bless you, I will bless, and those who curse you, I will curse. And they were believers in the literal word of the Bible, and they said, we have to support Israel because God told us to. And the party's move from being this country club, oil man party to being a populist party supported largely at the grassroots by people who believed theologically that they were obliged to support Israel was one of the miracles of Israel's existence. I mean, and it's one of those moments where you say something supernatural or providential is going on here, because that had to happen while the Democrats were getting more and more secular, less and less supportive of this idea that Israel was a progressive state. Certainly with Begin's election, it stopped being a progressive
I have
state.
to fix something. I forgot the name of the author. It's Walter Russell
Mead, of course.
And it's called The Ark of the Covenant. It's a wonderful book about Israel, America relations in the formative period. Ruthie.
It is wonderful. Well, something, since our time is running out and we have to wrap things up, I'd like to say that I feel really relieved to live in Israel. I mean, I grew up in New York, not to a very late age. I mean, I moved to Israel when I was 19. And I have to say, and I've said this many times to people who say, well, it's just as dangerous to live in Israel when you have missiles flying and terrorists all over the place. But I have to tell you, the thought of somebody calling me a dirty Jew is more frightening than running for shelter in a bomb shelter. And I don't even know why, even if someone weren't violent towards me. It just is so horrifying to me that with all this happening, I just say, thank God I live here, because I can, I can't stand the Israeli left, especially since they have even less of a right to not notice what neighborhood they're in. However, at least, we're safe. That's how I feel, safe here, despite all the enemies.
So I would say, the only thing I'd say in response to you is, so in our family, so you're here establishing the family beachhead, 4 kids, you have 4 grandchildren, and made a Jewish life for the Podhoretz family here. And I'm back in America fighting for you against the bad guys. And now I have to do it in my own city, not just in my own country.
So I will add, Ruthie said she was born in New York. You were born in New York too, I believe. I was born in Melbourne, Australia. And we've never had a guest on our show before, as I said before. And Ruthie said we make an exception for her brother, and I was very happy to do so, especially since your visit is so timely with the visit of Mamdani, and you're from New York, and you've written about these issues, and you've talked about these issues on your own podcast. But to be fair, I have 3 siblings in Australia, and I want to say now to the camera, Debbie, Lily, Alex, any of you want to be on this show, you're invited to be here too. If John can be here, you have a right to be here too. And until then, next week, this is Israel Undiplomatic.